Yeah, let's talk about it, shall we? Inside Out 2 has just absolutely eaten the box office, signaling to the world that Pixar is very much back. It kicked things off with the biggest opening weekend since Barbie last summer with $115 million. And as its run continues, it does not seem to be stopping anytime soon. I have no doubt that $1 billion gross is on the charts. Clearly. And after a desire 2024 for Hollywood, this is very much the kind of performance that the industry needed. And all of a sudden, despite initial whispers that an Inside Out 3 wouldn't happen, I think the story is going to be very different in the halls of Disney after this. And so, with Toy Story 5 coming to us in about 2 years' time, I think it's fair to say that this isn't the last of the sequels of Pixar. Not to mention the fact that Pixar have already announced that they're banning the directorially life-inspired stories of Luca and Turning Red, and are looking for more mass-appeal movies, including thinking about Monsters, Inc. as just a sequel on the side. It is very much clearly the new business model going forwards, which may not be the news that the fan base necessarily wants to hear. I mean, hey, none of these sequels that are being in-theorized or actually produced would have actually happened without the creativity and originality of those first movies. You know, Inside Out 2 is doing so well because audiences were so on board with the world of Inside Out 1 first. However, in an ironic twist, I guess, the first Inside Out came out at a point where it was one of the few original movies amongst Pixar's sequel frenzy. So I guess the only silver lining I can hope for is maybe there will be the occasional original one to pop up between all of these. Because yeah, back then, before Inside Out 2, we were treated to Toy Story 3, Cars 2, oh boy, and Monsters University. And then after Inside Out, we got Finding Dory, Cars 3, and The Incredibles 2. The 2010s very much saw Pixar going all in for the sequels. And yeah, it did make them a lot of money. I mean, The Incredibles 2, not even close to the best Pixar movie, is the most financially profitable. That really says everything, to be honest. I'm surprised they haven't done it sooner. But of course, at the same time, there's no doubt that it actually diminished their reputation from their god-tier home run that they had nearly bracketed between Toy Story and Toy Story 3. Ironically, a lot of the movies in that home run were the ones that got their mediocre sequels in the 2010s, huh? However, in Pixar's defense, they did go back to the consistent program of original movies. It's just such a shame that they didn't pop off enough that now we're here. I mean, when you think about it, really, Inside Out 2 is the first direct sequel since Toy Story 4. Like, they had a break for 5 years. I mean, I say direct, but of course there's also the Lightyear spin-off shaped elephant in the room over there, so, oh well. But at least originals-wise, we've got Onward, Soul, Luca, Turning Red, and Elemental. In many ways, you know, they're not amongst the higher echelons of Pixar movies, but they're largely decent movies that deserved a lot better. And when I say better, I mean the pandemic and the madman banker CEO stepping in to chuck them all on Disney+. And the only one that didn't have that exact treatment, whilst it did get a theatrical release, I'd say Onward was probably the most humiliated, literally being released in March 2020. Oof. I mean, seriously, what a time. It was out for like 2 weeks before the world just entirely got shut down, so, you know, unlucky. As for Turning Red, Soul, and Luca, they will always be the mascots of Bob Chapek did Pixar dirty. Chucked onto Disney Plus at no extra charge, the businessmen upstairs started treating Pixar like a content bucket instead of a major movie studio. Anyway, at no fault of their own, the story for Pixar now is the sequels make $1 billion, and whilst they will get more original stuff out too, I hope, I think sequels are very much here to stay. So, Pixar, what do we do from here? Well, I'm here to go through every Pixar movie and see just how each movie could be in line for a sequel. It's probably the discussions the CEOs are having upstairs anyway. So let's start things off with the confirmed Toy Story 5. I'm very much in the camp that 5 has to finish things off. Of course I am. It just can't go on forever, and I'm saying this as a Toy Story 4 defender. It would be a shame to just keep going until you make a bad one. Creating consistently good quality sequels is not then just an automatic challenge just to make another one to see how far you can push it. Except when it comes to the box office, which I feel Disney are using to push these sequels into commission. The past 2 movies both made $1 billion, and the franchise overall is worth over $3.3 billion. Combine that with Disney's strategy to reignite their financial beacon after a lackluster couple of years, this sequel was inevitable, really. It's the first time for me that a Pixar movie has really felt mandated by Disney. Actually, no, I guess that was Lightyear. I wouldn't be surprised if Lightyear was a compromise after the first request for a 5th movie, but we'll get to that later. Clearly, that didn't work, and they made a mistake stepping away from the Toy Story formula, which they're now returning to. In fact, Pixar at least are taking this project with the proper production treatment. They have brought on none other than Pixar legend Andrew Stanton to direct it, as we learned recently, being on the team since the original directed Finding Nemo and WALL-E as well. No notes, this is one thing that has actually got me excited for this movie. It makes me sad that we haven't gotten more movies from this guy, but I'm glad he's doing this now. It's the best you can make of a bad situation. But please, please, oh god, stop after this one. Hearing the words Toy Story 6 just makes me shudder. And technically, we already got them. There's already been 2 other side spin-off movies, so this is kind of Toy Story 7 already. Oh god, I hate that. We can't live in a world where Toy Story 3, which a lot of people still consider the real finale, becomes the halfway point in the franchise. Well, maybe we can, but let's just close things up with 5, guys. Like I've said with The Simpsons, let's conclude the franchise whilst the key actors are still there to do so. Don Rickles has sadly already lost that chance, so let's make sure no one else does too. I wouldn't be surprised if Tom Hanks has to actually say to Pixar, "I think we stopped things here." I can't do a Tom Hanks impression. It's been a great run, Toy Story. Let's get this story finished off, please. Another Bug's Life. These guys have been waiting for their sequel since the bloopers in Toy Story 2. Remember that cameo? I love that crossover as a kid. Fun fact, this is the only Pixar movie pre-Ratatouille to not have a sequel. That's kind of sad to hear. For the longest time, the general perception has been that this movie just hasn't had the same lasting impact as the other older Pixar movies. It's just the second one after Toy Story. In a weird way, it was more of a proof of concept for what range Pixar was capable of, more than an all-time classic in its own right. I really like this movie, but that's just the vibe I get for why it's not popular. I'd actually say this would be such a wild choice for a sequel, and I think it could actually do pretty well. It would give audiences such whiplash that they are actually doing this movie, I think everyone else would just go out of curiosity. You've literally got a whole world of bugs to explore, and the first barely even scratched the surface, because they couldn't render it very well. Remember, the original was made when Pixar were only just getting started. They actually ran into production problems just trying to animate the ant colony. They had to get crowds of staff together as a reference point because animating all of these damn ants was so complicated. Imagine Pixar with the resources it has now, giving the world of Bug's Life another go. I've always found recontextualizing scale from the Bugs' perspective fascinating, and to see that with the advancements they now have would be incredible. I mean, consider as well the visual advancements we've had in the animation field. Pixar have shown they could do super photorealistic animals. Imagine the giant bird now, or like, I don't know, there's actually kind of a lot of prompts out of just Bug World. And I'm not just saying that because I might be a little biased with all of my adorations for the Pikmin series. I'm not gonna lie, when I started putting this one together, I did not expect to be so sold on A Bug's Life 2, and yet here we are. I think it has a lot of potential creativity. Dare I say, it could make for a movie that's better than the original. That first movie did so much with the limitations it had, but the scope that they could add to it now would be something to behold. And honestly, it really is an archetype of its time, because when you think about that original movie, the thematics for it were incredibly communist. Which makes sense, of course, ants are a commune, but the whole point of it being that you can rise up against the strong even if you are weak just by the sheer numbers is a seriously interesting message to share in this growing late-stage capitalist world that would be, you know, again, whiplash to see in the 2020s. Maybe it's a message we could do with hearing, but you know what I mean? With it being an archetype of a new studio, not at all Disney-fied yet, and it's from the 90s, it could make a little bit more bold political choices. You know, the same as robots do from Blue Sky Studios, all sorts of stuff like that. It's less common now, and it would be interesting to see if they did that again. It's just a big curiosity piece, really. But of course, the main question is as well, out of the Pixar gallery, do parents of today really show their kids A Bug Life? Is that a go-to? Maybe not, but I tell you what, in a world where most families will invest in Disney+, their standard approach of pushing the original in the run-up to a sequel could really work for them. So do it, Disney. I'd like to see it. People born when the first came out are now literally in their 20s, so, you know, it is time for a refresher. I know I've literally said that Toy Story's been getting too old to continue, but that's because there's about 5 to 7 of them. We've just got the one Bug's Life, and having it revived after it's been resting since 1998? I don't know, it's the closest thing to an original sequel you could make. You know what I'm saying? A weird hybrid prompt. Following that, we have Monsters, Inc. the Third. Now, this is a prompt that they have outright said that they are considering doing, and I've talked about it at length in past videos, as well as another one that is currently in production now. So for the sake of not repeating myself, do check out that other video that I will have linked around here nearer to the time it releases. I'm recording this in a big batch like weeks in advance, so we'll see when this actually does come out. But yes, I've already done a full video on it. We'll go into a full proper breakdown because Pixar chief Pete Docter has said that they are actively looking out for another one. There's a big old debate about the prequel of Monsters University and the sequel of Monsters at Work and how to make it all work. And honestly, it's got a lot of hurdles to it. Just to touch base, the literal closed door ending of the first combined with Monsters at Work stumbling to make the Laugh Factory as engaging as the scare floor says to me that this is going to be a difficult prompt to work with. But an unofficial sequel had also been idealized by Disney a couple decades back, so there's options, I guess. We'll have gone into proper detail in that other video there. So with that out of the way, let's go to Finding Threemo. Or should I say Finding Marlin? That's right, that's my cliche pitch to cap off this trilogy. As with Finding Dory, we have established that the Finding title can be stretched to multiple definitions. We have the more literal route of finding Nemo, or the more zen route of Dory finding herself and then cancelling herself. We've also had two of the three principal characters having their title movie, so let Marlin get his. Now, the challenge here is... okay, well there's many challenges here, but spoiler alert, I don't think they should even do this one. The big argument to be made here is that the original Finding Nemo very much was more Marlin's movie, if anything else. It's a surprisingly controversial topic, as some would argue that it's the rare example of a dual narrative where both storylines are balanced enough to justify equal billing in the movie. Whilst others would argue that Marlin's journey is the A plot and Nemo's is the B plot. From the opening of the movie, we are going into Marlin's story, and the act of finding Nemo is the thing that he is doing. So what does that mean for the sequel? Does Marlin get swept away this time after a falling out with a teenage Nemo? Does Nemo have to be the adventurer this time in a movie called Finding Marlin? Is Dory still in it now everyone seems to hate Ellen DeGeneres? Who's to say? Here's another take, Finding Coral. That'd be a twist, wouldn't it? After 20 years of trauma, turns out she didn't die after all. That is a very sequel thing to do. Marlin and Nemo discover she somehow took all the siblings away with her and raised them separately. In fact, she was in cahoots with the big predator fish, who's now the stepdad. I don't know, you could go into awful fanfiction territory with this. There you go, Finding Nemo 3 done, ladies and gentlemen. This is a hard prompt, man. Even Finding Dory was a surprise, after the original seeming to have such an open and shut case. And that's the thing with Pixar. They are so good at telling a complete story in one feature-length narrative that they simultaneously introduce worlds with endless possibilities, but through stories that feel like they've been completely told and don't need a sequel. The fish world established in Nemo is fascinating, but I'm not looking for a Star Wars type spin-off plan to show the different corners of the world, you know? I feel like they may do something eventually like that, and that it may be a Finding Marlin of sorts, but I'm not sure it's an idea that immediately calls out as a must-be-made movie. The only two other avenues I could see having a hint of crowd engagement for would be following more of the story of the fish tank fish out on their world as they pop their bags and get out on the way doing whatever they do. You know, it's about that gang trying to progress to the ocean. No, they make it to the ocean. Whatever, what they do after that point. Or hey, I mean, another interesting one that very much changes the archetypes of this fish movie is make it a shark movie. Make it Finding Bruce. You know, Bruce is one of the favorite characters in Finding Nemo. His scenes are absolutely brilliant. He was like 80% of the marketing, to be honest. If you made an interesting shark sequel or even a shark prequel all about Bruce, you know, we see him as a baby and he finally gets to say his first words, "Hello there." Like, I think, hello. I think there's something there. It's the closest thing to an audience engagement you can find for stretching more out of a series that's already kind of been blundered in its second attempt. Or you follow what the Cars trilogy did. After Cars 2 ruined the series, the third one's just about retirement. Marlin's an old man, Nemo's got his own child. And then he has to find his child because this family has a problem with child abduction. Who knows? Yeah, this is a complicated prompt, so we'll say this one's going to be on the back burner if Pixar was to make any. Let's move on to the next that has the most and least potential, somehow at the same time, Incredibles 3 Revenge Syndrome. Only kidding on the title, he literally got slaughtered by a jet turbine. But of course, it was only a matter of time before I had to tackle this one, and Pixar are probably going to tackle this one too, to a certain extent. For those who follow this channel, you are very much aware that I do not like Incredibles 2. I said it was terrible, and a good chunk of people said that was a bit too far. And like, I get it, but I'm sorry, The Incredibles is my favorite Pixar movie, and when you put the sequel against the original masterpiece, I do genuinely think it's a terrible sequel. Standalone, it's okay. And granted, there are a lot of worse movies out there. Trust me, I know, I've covered at least 60 of them already myself. What really didn't help with the second movie is that there was 14 years of overhype for a sequel, and expectations were pretty high and all that. I aged from 7 to 21 between the two movies, so basically I grew up with my sequel expectations. So here we go. Can they do a third one? Actually, yes. If anything, to redeem the bad taste of the second one, which is going to be a running theme with a lot of these franchises. Incredibles is one of those worlds that does invite a lot of interesting storytelling, and I think there is an interesting third movie in that. For one, the cliffhanger of the first kind of bound the sequel to kick off straight from there, but I'd be totally down for a time jump when Violet is off to college and Dash is now a teenager. Not to mention Jack as a preschooler. Let's see these characters in a new context, different from the first two movies. How does Bob and Helen deal with aging? Craig T. Nelson, who voices Bob, is now on the older side, so actually incorporating that into Bob's story and aging him up a little would be interesting. How do you retire a superhero that so adores the glory days when he wasn't retired again? And despite the fact that I wasn't a fan of number 2, I would want to see Brad Bird back directing this, if it was to happen. It is this guy's franchise, after all. He's the one who brought it into Pixar. For those of you who weren't aware, generally, Pixar develop all their projects internally. They are, notorious for having one of the most thorough project development processes in the industry. However, Brad Bird brought his nifty superhero idea in from the outside. In fact, if Iron Giant had actually become a massive hit, we would be living in a world where The Incredibles became a traditionally animated movie under Warner Brothers Animation. Imagine that. Thankfully, Warner Brothers Animation completely went to pot and he instead reluctantly switched his movie to a CGI project. So yes, have Brad Bird involved in this. He may not be interested, but I would hope he'd direct it over anyone else. Hopefully with the $1 billion that Incredibles 2 made, they could pay the director enough to make him come back. Regardless of Incredibles 2, he's clearly an incredibly talented director and could probably make a decent third movie. However, he has also just signed a deal with Skydance to develop his next movie, which makes me think he wasn't too pleased with Pixar over the John Lasseter situation, so we may well not get that third movie in the end anyway. And even going beyond the idea of the kids being old, I wouldn't even be too upset if they did stay exactly the same age. They are meant to be a sort of Fantastic Four parody side piece, so keeping them as young family members also allows you to make a lot more movies out of them. But I think you could just expand better, thinking of the actual parodious themes of the original movie. It's meant to be a sort of tongue-in-cheek perspective of superheroes as a genre, and with it being a current genre of Marvelisms, make it not a Marvel movie. Emphasize more the Silver Age comics generation that these movies are set in, or extend it a little bit just to go into the next era. You can base it 10 years later if you want. It should sort of... It sounds simple to me, you know? What you really need is to not ruin the writing and thematic sides of things like the second movie did. Having a villain that starts monologuing and then you let them monologue completely tarnishes the entire tone of the franchise. That's the part you have to avoid. You need to just make it not generic, with a very thought-provoking and fun, villainous character. There was almost an extract of that with the Screenslaver if you listen to their monologue in the background that's practically muted when Elastigirl is flying around the skyscrapers. That's about as close as we got to good writing, and it's the themes that really need to come back in the third movie to master it. It doesn't really matter how old Dash is. But of course, aging them up or prequeling them back to the glory days so it's only the main two parents, that's also an avenue you could take with a lot of fun to it. Just nail the thematics. That's all you really need to do to make a good movie. Nail the writing and the rest should come with it. But I would say that I've been thinking about it on the surface level for 14 years. So let's move on to Cars Forever After. It doesn't really need it, but they'll do it for money, you know it. As discussed before in a previous video, they literally have a Kevin Feige type figure to oversee the Cars universe. They apparently have an untitled project slated for the later half of this decade, and it doesn't surprise me in the least. Cars is a huge enterprise for them, and whilst the movies aren't the biggest earners, they do make an excellent opportunity to sell a lot of toys. We're talking $10 billion worth of toy sales, people. I gotta make a video talking about toy content more. Maybe there's a giant avenue for a rabbit hole of how these things merchandise themselves. Suddenly letting another Disney studio make those Planes movies makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? When you are a studio who wants the funding for more original movies, you can always bet on a Cars movie to keep the lights on via the merch revenue. One way or another, I can see more Cars stuff coming. It's probably the easiest to do, as no one expects The Incredibles from it, you know? You don't have to worry about thematics and writing that badly. Everyone accepts that Cars is just the ugly duckling of the Pixar franchises. Is that a controversial take? They're pretty simplistic. It's an A to B kind of story. Literally, most of the time it's them racing A to B. Anyway, this is where I'd speculate on a story, but honestly guys, it doesn't matter what they do. Look at the second one. Mater becomes a secret agent as a sequel to a movie about a sports star getting stuck in a rundown area off Route 66. Whatever they do, it will make its money, and the industry at large will continue to ignore it in Pixar's canon as it always has. It may be very much now disgraced John Lasseter's baby, but clearly, Cars on the Road came out on Disney Plus to say, not anymore, my guy. It is Disney's vehicle, I'm not sorry for that one, to monetize unlimited toy cars, and I just can't see them letting that go. Just stick some eyes on the window of any Hot Wheel design and oh look, more Cars merchandise. Stick them in the background at one of the races and that's a bona fide character to produce a toy off. Anyway, let's talk about the potential for Ratatouille. Yep, that's the title we'll go with. It seems as this movie will never happen. First, can we just acknowledge that Incredibles, Cars, and Ratatouille is the most chaotic sequence of Pixar releases? Just feels weird that those three are bedfellows. Incredibles seems so much older than Ratatouille. Anyway, recently Pete Docter had big words on not making specifically a live-action remake of Ratatouille. He was talking about generally not doing live-action remakes, which I'm sure Disney was thrilled about hearing, considering that's literally been one of their business models. However, it was in direct response to a request for a Ratatouille remake. Again, just watch Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's all right there for you. And with that, I think it's also the movie that most people agree should never really get a sequel. It's a pitch-perfect movie that does not need an expansion. I mean, what do you even do? Remy's restaurant gets torn apart by Skinner, has to start from scratch in London? That is practically what happens anyway in the initial restaurant. But now this time we've set it in London to be totally different. Seeming as all the French characters speak English is the language barrier represented by all the English people speaking French? No idea, this movie ain't happening. I'm sorry guys, but this continues the theme of Pixar's amazing roster of open-shut stories that just don't have to have a follow-up. I might have preferred if the movie was a little bit longer, had a little bit more meat and potatoes to it, because that's my hot take about a Pixar movie, but otherwise, it's fine, leave it as it is. Hey there, thank you for making it halfway through this video. As per usual, do come along and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm quite liking making longer form content at the minute, so if you're interested in these kind of things, do give us suggestions for other big prompts you'd like us to cover over on our Discord server or down in the comments below. Anyway, thank you for making it halfway through. I'll let you get back to the rest of what Pixar can do with sequels from here on out. Speaking of unfollowable follow-ups, we have WALL-E and Eve Quantum Mania. Another one that is arguably too good to get a sequel. I mean, sure, actually seeing how rebuilding the Earth goes would be interesting, but that's just not what WALL-E's about. It's a love story for robots and another attack at capitalism in a different sense. And I do not need to see WALL-E and Eva going through a Shrek 2 style further exploration of their relationship. WALL-E 2 The Marital Problems is not something I need to see. Like the end of Monsters Inc., the resolution of WALL-E gave us a definitive change in the shape of that world, and either direction you take does not align with the original. Either you further develop the relationship and massively overcomplicate it, or you follow the Earth being rebuilt with maybe things getting heated when other ships also return to the planet. The latter completely takes us away from WALL-E's story and the focus that we had in the first one. I got everything we need to know about what happens next from the end credits with Peter Gabriel's song, okay? However, I would absolutely be up for some new WALL-E shorts pre-movie, where him and maybe the cockroach get up to some shenanigans with junk on Earth. In fact, maybe even a prequel that explores how WALL-E got to the point that we meet him. I could definitely see a misfit story where WALL-E is amongst the other more efficient WALL-E units, allowing us to see his personality develop in contrast to them. We already got to see WALL-E as his super robotic form at the end of the movie. Imagine there are 20 robotic super WALL-Es and then our WALL-E getting around wanting to shove his face in another bra again, you know? I gave a bad example, but there's something weirdly wholesome that you can make out of a little short like that. WALL-E's training, you know? Plus, world building considered, seeing how things fell apart right from the beginning would be an interesting spin, and also removes the need to having any human characters. Some of the best parts about WALL-E is its ability to do that non-diegetic, non-dialogue storytelling. Making that an entire short is super artsy, and hey, it gives you a running for best animated short, you know? Pixar, get on it. A modern silent film may be a risk, but you got people on board with the first one. Plus, that first half hour on Earth was everyone's favorite bit, admittedly, so why not double down on it? So yeah, absolutely no to a sequel. However, some shorts or maybe a prequel mini is a solid maybe from me. Up to, or maybe down to make it edgier. Speaking of shorts, Dug Days did a good job on expanding on the movie whilst not outstaying its welcome. The shorts are simple and do not take away anything from the original movie. I don't think a sequel or a prequel fits here. I don't need to see the opening 2-minute masterpiece played out over 90 minutes, although admittedly, that's probably your best spin you could make for audience engagement. But of course, that would also be completely undoing one of the most powerful scenes that Pixar has ever done. We all already know the spoilers. Don't do that. Sure, there would be a bittersweet quality throughout knowing that Ellie is going to die, and I guess you could add some spin about a secret that happened the whole time, but again, that happened in the movie with the book and the diary, so yeah. I'd say just don't bother telling a feature-length version of a story you told perfectly in under 2 minutes. If anything, it was a loss that you didn't make it before, but now you haven't, so oof. As for a sequel, what do you do? Doug is taken away from his advanced collar technology, the bird's in trouble again, Carl accompanying Russell to supervise a scout camp goes awry into another adventure, we see Doug's new date and they're relevant or evil? Maybe? I don't know. Again, this was such a one-shot idea of the grieving pensioner launching his house in the air with balloons. I feel like you remove any element from that first movie, and it just isn't up anymore. Even Dug Days isn't called Up Dug Days. So yeah, another one that just doesn't need it and can't really articulate it, and Pixar knows that. So let's move on to another undernoted Pixar movie, Brave Too Bold. So yes, Brave, on the other hand, is a movie that people probably sometimes forget actually exists. It's definitely on the mixed end of the Pixar scale. I once again made a terrible episode on it, probably a little bit more of a hotter take on that one. I mean, she does seem to pop up amongst the Disney princesses with one of the only decent jokes in Ralph Breaks the Internet Sealing the Deal. You know, the Scottish landscapes are spectacular, it's a nice enough story. Whatever. It's fine. It's one of the more interesting parts of the Pixar theory, with Boo from Monsters Inc. being the old witch, and whilst I can't really think of any, it's got a decent enough world and lore to make more movies from. It kind of has the How to Train Your Dragon without the dragons, which I think is part of its issue, considering any of these sequels need to make some kind of money. I don't see much money coming out of this one, really. The first one's over 10 years old, and I don't think anyone's really asking for a sequel out of it. And not for the same reasons as Ratatouille or Up, I just don't think people care. It definitely felt like the first of Pixar's original movies to not really hit big. Yes, the first Cars is there, but that was still a big hit for the studio. This was too, it made over $500 million in the kind of elemental range, but it just didn't hit the same level as that initial home run of Pixar movies. It's one of those things as well that I think people were hooked on the idea that she is an independent woman who wants to fight for her own right to a partner, so, there's that nice opening start. But then the mother becoming a bear and the mother-daughter relationship without a bear that speaks, it gets lost. The best idea I can think of for the next expansion I can really see is completely ditching the mother relationship, which already ruins your initial movie, and it has entirely Merida going off to a new land. Instead of the suitors coming to her, she's now going on an adventure to find something else. Doesn't have to be a person, it could be a legendary treasure, maybe she's going out to find another bear that's been cursed. Whatever, it's her going out, kind of like a Horizon Zero Dawn-esque story. It'd be an excuse to see the beautiful Scottish landscape, seeing her being resourceful and, good with her archery, I guess. All sorts of hair physics can go on, and you can make more conversations about, royalty and combining political powers together. She goes out to find other princesses now that she's done with the boys, and these princesses are basically Ralph Breaks the Internet, very pompous, girly, and overly feminine, and so then she can be the one that breaks the mold in some form there. It's not the story of the first movie, it's the closest thing I can find to stitching something together. You don't really need it, though. I don't think it's on Pixar's checklist for sequels, and honestly, I don't think too many people mind. I certainly don't. I just wish the original was better. But we'll leave it at that. Inside Out 3 High School Bluesical. What a title. So here we go. Yeah, we've already discussed the possibility of this one as well. Watch the video if you're interested in that. Inside Out 2's pretty much locked in for $1 billion gross. And that's Frozen and Toy Story 2 kinds of money, so good luck not having a third one commissioned. As I've said in a couple videos now, I think the potential for Inside Out movies is limitless. You could literally follow each and every stage of Riley's growth. Unlike the toys, the emotions don't get discarded at 18. There is so much potential, and I think Inside Out is definitely the most flexible to be a fully fledged franchise. And if you want to hear more about how Inside Out could take over as Pixar's new Toy Story level franchise, we have a video for that too. Wasn't that good, Dinosaur? Absolutely not. That's not happening. Moving on. If only they made the original better, then it could have been something. It had potential as a premise. Moving on. Wake Me Up Before You Coco. Again, we're nearing Ratatouille and Up territory here. The standalone movie is just too good to compromise. I'd say The Land of the Dead has a lot of playroom than the other two, but it's still tricky. Like Monsters Inc., Bugs Life, and Inside Out, Coco has a world that invites a playroom. Obviously, Toy Story's literally one of these, and begrudgingly Cars gets a tick here too, but Pixar's very good at world building that allows for a huge number of inventive details and gags. Even now with Inside Out 2, for the few of you that haven't seen it yet, all I'll say is sarcasm, you know? It's those kind of trademark Pixar side gags where a character enters somewhere like the main city of this world and you get these great cutaways to show how that world works. Coco has this in spades, and there's so much more you could explore with The Land of the Dead. And the mechanics of this world isn't just the comedy, there's inevitably a great sadness to this purgatory type place with those who fade away once they have been fully forgotten by the living. It'd be great to explore that world again, but then it's the same problem. All this world building, yet the story itself is very one-shot. You'd have to find a pretty interesting premise to bring Miguel back to the Land of the Dead. I don't know, put the guy in a coma? Bit dark, but I'm sure a tenable reason why Miguel needs to go back there exists. It's in the difficult tier, but I do think it's possible. Even if it would do something like completely sever yourself from the original movie. It's an original take, a short of a guy who wants to be learned again, and so he has to do something while he's fading away. That's a simple short, completely detached from anybody else. Yeah. Further onwards. Now, this is interesting. In my view, it's a great idea for a story middlingly executed, but a world that has an intrigue at the same level of Monsters Inc., if done right. I acknowledge that I've kind of sandwiched my criticism between two compliments there, but hey, that's my take. It also has the dubious honor of being amongst the Chris Pratt voice acting lead, where it literally just sounds like him, and that's kind of a stain on the legacy, I would argue, for this movie. It's just another Chris Pratt movie, not a Pixar movie. You know what I mean? They're very two different tiers of movies, but they were very much going for a younger version of his Parks and Recreations character in this movie, so I think he's actually well casted here, decently. Nonetheless, it is kind of annoying that he's managed to get Pixar on his voice acting Thanos glove. The fact that he's got Lego, Pixar, Mario, and Garfield on the CV within 10 years is just wild to me, and I'm tired of it. The movie itself is fine, but there is so much more potential with this world. Again, it's tough when literally the first movie is built around two brothers trying to be reunited with their dad. Any attempt to tell a different story in this world will inevitably feel like it's just come straight from the heart of that first movie. However, considering it wasn't a big hitter in the first place, many people wouldn't mind so much if we did go somewhere else. I honestly would be game for a story told within that same world, but again, with completely different characters. This is the first one like that for me. This is the one that really has the potential to lean in that direction more than anything else we've spoken about. Most of these movies, the characters define their world. This one, there were so many interesting characters we met throughout their quest that I would love to see more, just to see what Pixar does with its magic system. The pandemic made a flop out of this thing, so it won't really happen, and I wasn't that big of a fan of it, but a sequel that does something new to revitalize a sort of flubberingly, stuttering, stumbling movie, yeah, I'd like to see it. Keep it away from a generic adventure like a D&D story, but showcase some sort of interesting magic system with a mage and a dwarf and a lion manager person. There's a very interesting species you could play around with here. And it doesn't have to go so much for the death and grieving aspect. Just something. There's something there. If you had to bring it back from the dead, it's doable. Just make sure you bring the whole thing back and not just half of it this time. Speaking about bringing back from the dead, let's talk about Better Call Saul. Again, great world that could have had more to offer, but the movie was very much one very specific story. Plus, I think we learned everything we need to know about that world. It's another thing that Pixar likes to do again. They're very good at world building and opening this massive potential premise, but then they also seem to cover all of the dots that make this world intriguing in a single standalone story. It's very well compacted. Returning to it again would just feel like going to the same ideas. They covered a lot of ground in the original, so I don't know if there's a lot more to explore here. It's very much a movie that would be in danger of repeating itself, and considering in-universe it's also never happened in centuries, it would be weird that it happens again 4 years later. Unless the very premise of dying as a system is dimensionally fractured and the world goes crazy. Actually, that would be interesting. If all of the souls of the world accidentally returned, we unblipped the world, everyone who died is back, and everyone who's not been born yet suddenly appears in the world? Crazy. They'd probably grow up to be a bunch of iPad kids. But even getting out of that wild idea, still, if you went to something more grounded, after the first one, it feels like someone's actually gotta die in this sequel movie. That's very cheery, isn't it? Oh god, don't remind me of the existential terror of the Great Beyond scenes. Terrifying. Pixar loved talking about death and grieving in this sort of lineup, didn't they? Luca Tuca. The Pixar film that most people have unfortunately already forgotten as well. I also reckon these kind of movies that are specifically the director's initial personal stories being adapted that are now going to be disadvantaged are also less likely to be sequelized because they are those initial personal, less mass media appeal stories. Even though every movie that Pixar's made must have some sort of directorial personal story attached to it, Finding Nemo was about a relationship with their son being not interested in their things. Monsters, Inc. probably had an element of fatherhood going into the storytelling as well. All of them have that. One of the creators of Ratatouille probably felt he couldn't cook and has an affinity for rodents. It's plausible. But still, going back to Luca, again, I don't think this is the movie's fault at all that it had been forgotten. Out of the 3 Disney Plus releases, this was the one right in the middle that, let's face it, barely got any marketing. At least with Turning Red, I still saw billboards and posters on the sides of buses. However, I feel like Luca got absolutely nothing but the front feature spot on the Disney Plus homepage on the day it came out. And with that in mind, I'm afraid to say I cannot see this one getting a sequel. Because, yeah, it was telling a very personal story anyway, which didn't really call for a follow-up. However, on the business side of things, this is probably the Pixar movie that the least amount of people have actually seen. And yes, I include The Good Dinosaur in that. That still made over $330 million, so you can bet people definitely went to see it, they just all got disappointed by the end of it. Or fell asleep. They regretted it afterwards, but by God they saw it. But no, I don't think we'll be getting a Luca Tuca. The world of H2O mermaids anyway, it's not the most original idea to play off with on a world-building perspective. So let's talk about a movie sequel that does not have a creative title, according to me. Turning Red 2. Okay, there is something to be said there about the Red Panda family. I'd actually be vaguely game for this. I know there's a lot of angry people online who hated on this movie. Some legitimate, even the art style is very different for a Pixar movie. It's quite cartoony. Some just don't want kids to know metaphorically about the menstrual cycle, so go figure. And actually, it did do pretty well on Disney Plus, apparently receiving 11.4 billion minutes of viewing time. Gosh, 11.4 billion minutes watch time is life-changing amount of money. Just a shame there's no money to be made off of streaming, eh? Almost like it should have been in the cinema. Considering its divisive online response, it may very well be something that Disney will avoid doing anything else around. However, I'd be down for another one. I'd love to see that family again. There's definitely an interesting lore around this, turning into a giant panda when we're frustrated. Again, I could see it simply just being a prequel story. How did the first red panda in the family go about? Give me an Avatar: The Last Airbender super prequel woo episode. Turn it into a movie? I don't know. The other thing about making all these prequel, original, how did it come to be kind of stories in the world building is you then lose the mother-daughter relationship. No, not really. This could be generational trauma. Let's learn about the very first daughter with the very first red pandaisms with those ancient Asian representatives to tell a really interesting cultural story. There's something there. Just don't set it in 2002. Less of the boy bands, more of the great artistic medieval ancient China landscape, Done under the Pixar lens, I think it could do really, really well and would be massively diverse from Canada. Or sure, take it into a sequel. We could always do with more of that adolescent Panda Hulk content, I guess. If you really want to piss a certain circle off, make it an adult story about menopause. The menopause panda is the real big bad. Anyway, let's move on to Lightyear 2, Your Own Worst Enemy. Weirdly, the only movie on this list to actually set up a sequel, and yet it is very unlikely to ever get one. Who'd have thought? Yep, I feel bad for dragging Lightyear back up for another round. It very much does not live up to the Toy Story franchise it hails from. Aside from the suit design and the word Buzz Lightyear, Zurg, and Star Command, this basically had no connection to those movies. However, that does not mean it was a bad movie either. It had some really interesting emotional story with the use of time travel, and we'd also already seen that in Interstellar, which is really bold when you know you're going to be targeting a young audience, you know? It's the only excuse you can say for how it doesn't matter that Interstellar did it first, it's aiming a little younger. It's a very different approach to what a Buzz Lightyear spin-off could have been, which may have very well been its problem. I think that what Disney wanted and the audience expected was an action-heavy Marvel movie version of Buzz Lightyear, while Pixar wanted to do a character-driven science fiction story. And we got something sort of in the middle that merges and works out neither of them, leaning more on the Pixar's end, but still contending with the 40% off money-hungry Disney influence. So what we got in the marketing was a movie that just didn't know what it was. It's Buzz Lightyear, whilst definitely not a Toy Story movie. Audiences were confused. Buzz Lightyear didn't even sound like Buzz Lightyear. He sounded like Captain America. What's that about? This must be the only circumstance where Tim Allen could have genuinely made a difference to the box office, and would be better than Chris Evans. It wouldn't have made the movie better, but people would have definitely bought into the fact that this character was still Buzz Lightyear. But they didn't, and it showed. $226.4 million is what we got from this movie. Not even that reversed sandwich could save this movie. And yes, that's over $100 million less than The Good Dinosaur. I repeat, Good Dinosaur made more movie than the Buzz Lightyear movie. So no, it won't get a sequel, but that doesn't matter. I'm not really interested in one. I'd actually be really interested to see where they would take a second movie. You know, not that I'd want it to exist. No, we can accept the weird Zurg twist. We can roll with it and have him build his legions as a galactic empire-level force against Star Command. They could do Star Wars with Buzz Lightyear, bring things full circle from Toy Story 2, but maybe that would be terrible. But hey, I'd love to see them try. Well, heck, when you think about it, the future Buzz just went and stole the real big bad's evil, equipment, so you could make a sequel about the real Zurg and just remove the future Buzz element, because he's clearly not actually the one that built all of these robots and things. You could make it more based off of the cartoon Buzz Lightyear Star Command. That would be a lot more in-universe, makes a lot of sense, a great expansion. Or hey, you could take the premise of taking a spin-off of a character and do it with someone else. Make a Woody movie that is a weird, maybe not photorealistic, but an interesting new aesthetic for a sheriff cowboy movie. And then do it with actually Tom Hanks, or at least his brother, and then, anything other than what we actually got could have done it, you know? I doubt they'll make it. It's not really going to be good because they've already ruined it with their first attempt. It's not going to do any better with any future attempts, but it's something. The first step on just making anything close to good Buzz content is just putting the Buzz cartoon Star Command on Disney+. Where is it, Disney? Do you not own the rights to it? Still, they should have just done a Pixar animated version of that show's lore, Easy pickings. Oh well. Elemental 2, Earth, Wind, and Fire Boogaloo. Here we go, the opening weekend disaster that could. Despite initially looking like a financial car wreck, Elemental ended up climbing to $500 million. And I really liked this one. Not a top-tier Pixar movie, but pretty decent. This has a lot of world building to further explore, much like Inside Out. It's kind of just Pixar's thing. They make great worlds. Again, we have that playroom of a world that could go in so many directions, particularly in its abstract nature. There is a lot of potential to expand on the inventiveness of that world. Director Peter Sohn did a truly great job fully realizing the story that they wanted to tell within such a surreal concept, as the message of that could have easily gotten lost in translation. Just like the marketing of all the damn trailers. It's difficult to say, as like with many of these movies, you need to find an angle where it doesn't look like you're forcing the play box back open. They're just really too good at telling a complete story. It's why Monsters University had to be a prequel, Finding Dory had to switch gears to another character, and Incredibles 2 happened. So where does that leave us? Well, here's a summary. For movies that I think didn't do well enough for a sequel, we have Brave, Good Dinosaur, Onward, Luca, Lightyear, and Elemental. For movies I think are too well concluded to get a sequel, we have Ratatouille, Up, and Coco. A movie also in that category, but perhaps has some prequel potential, we may have WALL-E. For movies that will get a sequel, because Disney, we have Toy Story, Monsters Inc., Inside Out, and surprise, 20 more Cars movies. For a couple not totally out of possibility, we have Nemo 3 and The Incredibles 3. And for movies I actually think would make for good sequels, I've got down, of all things weirdly enough, A Bug's Life, also Inside Out, Turning Red if they're not cowards, and to some of my subscribers' surprise, Incredibles 3 as well. Though I still think they'd once again completely miss the potential of an Incredibles sequel, because of course they will. It's all being forced out anyway. And there we have it. Like many of you guys, I'd like to see Pixar still produce a lot more original stuff than sequels. Hey, maybe if they did do all of these prompts and then an original every other prompt, maybe I wouldn't hate that, man. I don't know what I want anymore. Every animation studio seems to be going into total meltdown crisis mode right now. I can't even rely on the likes of DreamWorks to hold up my mental stability because they've got Megamind going on over there. And Blue Sky Studios, the last beacon of good animation, imploded a few years ago. So who knows what's going to happen? Unfortunately, the success of Inside Out 2 has skewed this dream against the unfairly compared to pandemic movies, and so I've just tried to make the best of our upcoming new reality. I'll be curious to see if any of these predictions ever actually roll out. For now though, my name's been Daz. Do let me know which of these sequels you'd like to see or any ideas you have to make the best out of these franchises. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video, and I shall see you in a little bit.